Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe, and welcome to the final part of the Eduard 48th scale ME 109G-14 AS. Oh, what a mouthful. Right, in this episode then we're going to be doing the painting and weathering and finishing off the project. It all started with primer, and back in the day I never used to prime. I never sort of saw the need for it, but definitely the last half a dozen years or so I've definitely been priming, and my primer of choice is Mr. Surfacer. This is 1500 thinned with their levelling thinner, and it gives a really nice tough finish. The advantages of priming are a number of them. One, probably the least important, is it helps with adhesion of the paint to the model. I tend to use lacquer paints, so therefore it's not really strictly necessary, because that will bite into the surface, but it does show up all the different flaws and mistakes that you won't necessarily see on bare plastic. The other advantage is it gives a uniform undercoat. So in this model there's a little bit of photo etch. There's no filler as such, but some models, multimedia models, if you're using resin photo etch or maybe even a lot of filler, then it's really advisable. This kit fits really well. Filler is, there is no filler really, just a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, white here and there over some seams, but I like to prime my models these days anyway. And as you can see, it gives a very nice, even and very smooth coat. All ready for paint. Now, I did say that it does show up some of the flaws, and there was one in front of the windscreen, the seam. So that was quickly just rubbed back, and then a little bit more primer stuck over the top to blend it in. Right, now we can get down to the fun stuff. This is Alclad duralumin for the metal undersides, and I'm just using my thumb there just to mask off the wheel well, and you can see how shiny that is. I didn't bother with the gloss black underneath. With all that masked up, it was time for the RLM 76 on the underside of the control surfaces and the wingtips. This is MRP, and again, this is almost like Alclad, this stuff. It's extremely smooth, it's very thin, you just build it up in light smooth layers. And to break up the surface, I added a little bit of white there just for a lighter tone, and just went in and did some random fading. I'm not a big fan of these templates. I find it all a bit too harsh, and I just find this is a little bit more realistic. It's a little bit more blended in really. And talking of white, I'm going to paint all the markings on this model. Obviously the cross is in white, but the number is white as well. The Hakenkreuz, or the swastika on the tail, and wherever there was going to be some white markings, that had an undercoat of white. The MRP is just built up in a nice solid layer, and this is the advantage using MRP, is it's just very, very thin. Just laying the complete mask on the wing there, and then what I'm going to do is just burnish down the cross bits, and then very carefully peel off the female part of the mask, leaving the male part of the mask in place. Slightly different technique on the Fuselage cross. So the female part of the mask was placed in the right position. These vinyl masks are quite good. They you can sort of peel them off and back on again. Just be careful though, they can sort of stretch and distort if you're not careful. But going backwards and forwards, just making sure that it's in the right place. A little bit of a burnish down with the finger, and then coming in with the individual cross parts, and we'll just put those in place, and then when they're all in, we will remove the female part. If you've never done this before and you're thinking of giving it a go, then these late war German fighters are actually quite a good one to get started. There's no sort of 4-colour roundels or anything like that, just one colour cross and a very simple sort of fuselage marking as well. So this set is from Montex, and yeah, massive fan of Montex masks. Now you'll see I'm putting the 3 here, so number 13 was the actual aeroplane, but I just wanted to do something a little bit different and a different aeroplane from the same unit, and I ended up changing my mind actually and replacing the number from the other option, which is the Croatian option, with the set, and that was a number 4. But there we go, there's all the masks in place. Now we can get on with the camouflage and spray around it. So this is the late war, some people call it a late war RLM 76. It was named RLM 84, but I don't think there's any evidence for that, or at least it's quite scant, so it's still open to debate. But it's a kind of sky type colour, which I mixed from sky and various other tones, all MRP, until it was good to my eye. And again, that was lightened in various places. I did think it was a little bit too sort of a bluey greeny colour. I wanted it more of a warmy beige colour, so I ended up going backwards and forwards until I was happy with the tone. And you can see here, this is slightly sort of warmer, more beige tone going on over the top, but I'm using the sort of previous colour as an undercoat. You can see the difference there. And again, that was all lightened up and given sort of random sort of mottly effect just to break up that monotone. And obviously it goes quite high up the fuselage halves. The Geschwader marking, the little sort of squiggly line, or the Grippen marking I should say, that was black, so I don't know why I ended up painting over that. But anyway, never mind. Now the tail. This had the RLM 83, the dark green, sprayed on. Then using blue tack for these splodges, I then sprayed on a slightly lightened version of RLM 75. I find it a little bit too dark, and in hindsight I lightened it up a little bit too much actually, so I did go back later on and darken it down a little bit. But it's quite an odd sort of splodgy tail, these late war 109s. Right, now for the main event, the main camouflage. So this is the light green RLM 82. Again, MRP. Now I did find this a little bit sort of too dark and too grey in tone, so I just added a few drops of quite a vivid green in there from again MRP, the Soviet sort of wiggle hub green if you like. Just a couple of drops, didn't want to go too mad. And then this was just sprayed in place, just following the camouflage pattern that was in the instructions. And again, I added a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, and just added a little bit of fading to the camouflage. Although bearing in mind this was a late war 109, so probably didn't survive that long. So I didn't want to go too harsh on the weathering. Now for the fun bit, mottling, and I haven't done this for quite a while actually. It's the paint is just 1 or 2 drops of thinner in there, and you can see I've kept the cap on because that gives a more sort of diffuse spray pattern. And I did have a couple of references for late war 109s, so this was quite a dense model but quite distinct, so it meant I could have quite a lot of fun actually doing that. Now for the brown violet, and again it was the MLP I think is a little bit too green, so I just added a few drops of RAF dark earth in there just to brown the tone a little bit. And you can see there I've removed the cap from the airbrush so I can get a really tight demarcation. Just be very careful that you don't ding the end of the needle brush, sorry, the end of the needle, which I have done on more than one occasion, which is a right pain. But it means you can be really precise with the paint. And you can see there how sharp the demarcation is. And then it's just a question of going around the model. So always starting with the actual demarcation, and you can see, just look at the angle of the airbrush there. I'm angling it into the colour. That's going to avoid or minimise overspray. And it's a question of just experimenting with the paint mix. MRP is pretty easy. It's pretty much good to go straight from the bottle. But as I said, I did add 1 or 2 drops of thinner, not very much. And just play around with the distance from the model, with the air pressure, and it's a real exercise in trigger control, this. You see there now, once both sides are done, we can go in it and just fill in the gaps. And once the wings are done, wings are done, it's onto the fuselage. Again, this is over the quite the broad black sort of tail band, but it helps to sort of blend everything in actually. And you see, just moving it backwards and forwards, you can get that demarcation line quite nice and tight, and it just curves up slightly towards the tail fin. And back on with the mottling, and we're just sort of filling in the gaps around the green that we've already done, trying to make sure some of the underlying RLM 84 or late war 76, whatever you want to call it, make sure some of that is showing through, and it's kind of a cloudy dense, I suppose you could call this type of model. And I do go backwards and forwards. I get some of the surface colour in, touch bits up, go back in with the green, go back in with the brown, and I just keep going backwards and forwards until I'm happy. And just going underneath the tail there, I did go back and spray over that eventually. Okay, here's the rudder, which had an interesting pattern. So the bottom of the rudder had some RLM 76. So after that was painted, I just went in and touched in the RLM 76 at the base of the rudder. Again, doing it freehand, spraying into the colour, quite close, relatively low air pressure, just enough that I'm getting the perfect amount of atomization. If the air pressure is too high, it will kind of splatter, and the acrylic paints are quite hot, so it will kind of dissolve the paint underneath. So you don't want it too much high pressure. But if the air pressure is too low, it will go speckly, so I just experiment. And here's the RLM 76 splodges on the tail. Bit nerve-wracking that, I have to say. The inside of the cross was the dark green RLM 82. I had to think about that then. It wasn't so long ago that 82 was the light green, but I think research says 82 was the dark green now. So again, MRP, and that was just sprayed freehand on the inside of the cross. You can see how very similar it is to the brown violet RLM 81. And now for the black tail. So this was not deep black, that's going to be too black. I just lightened it up with a little bit of light grey and then a little bit of dark earth in there to get a warmer tone. And now for the fun bit, revealing the masks. So very carefully, desperate not to scratch the paint, we can go in and peel off the masks. And you can see how effective all that is. Now for the wing cross, and I just prefer to do it this way around, doing the white first and then the camouflage. You can do it the other way around, but I find you can get a build up of white paint because you do need quite a lot just to make it opaque. And the crosses underneath were dead easy. These were just one single colour in black. So a little bit of the ammo purple low-tack tape, just I don't want to mar the metal finish underneath. And you can see how sort of simple these markings are, so how effective they are as well. Just look at that surface detail underneath, all the rivets and everything. It's great actually, these masks. RLM02 just on the inside bits. It was also done on the flaps as well. And now for the oils. So this is a sludge wash. I just mixed up various oil paints to make a complementary tone for the green. And then I mixed up a different tone for the brown and a different tone for the underside. And you can see I'm actually avoiding the white areas because the contrast would be too stark, I think. And then a darker tone for the darker camouflage. And I tend to do this because I think that the tonal variation is very important and they've got to be complementary, and one size does not necessarily fit all. And when it's dry, I'll just leave it for about half an hour or so. We can go in with some kitchen towel and just polish it off. And this technique is really good for these Eduard kits where the rivets are very fine. We don't want the contrast to be too high, but we don't want the rivets getting lost. And a cotton bud is very useful for getting into those nooks and crannies, and it does a good job of blending actually. But you can go in with a brush if you need to as well, and end up sort of blending some of the oil paint into the camouflage underneath, should you need it. And that is the wash complete. It's very subtle, and that's what I want, not too much contrast. So what I normally do is I'll seal that in with a satin varnish just to protect it, because now we're going to go in and do some oil dot weathering. And this isn't necessarily random. It's kind of random with a bit of thought, if that makes sense. So lighter tones on highlights in the middle of panels, darker tones along joins in shadow areas, and it's just all about creating that extra bit of contrast, and a bit of grime and a bit of fading. And then with a very slightly damp brush, we'll just go in and we'll just blend that. Just the initial blend. Once that's blended in, I'll hit it with a hairdryer and then go in with a dry brush for the final blend. And as I said, this is simulating fading and a bit of grime, and you can see how effective that is, just on the inner part of the wing, comparing it to the outer part. And here's that dry brush, just blending the final bits of oils in. And it's not necessarily just this one pass. I do go back in, add a little bit if I think I need it, and if you don't like it, you can just rub it off with a bit of thinners on a bit of cloth and start over. And yes, I know that stencil is wrong on the flap. Okay, slightly different technique here on the metal areas. So again, oil paints, but rather than just sort of doing a blanket oil dot method, I'm going in there with this sort of dirty brown tone into the shadows, and then just blending that and working it into the surface. Oh, the camera's slightly off there, sorry about that. So this is a pretty much a dry brush, and I'm just going in there and I'm just working the oil paint into the surface. I'll try and get it more in shot next time. There we go, it's a bit better. And you can use your finger as well even. That's quite a nice tool, quite versatile. Because it's shiny, the metal, I tend not to use thinner if I can help it. Because otherwise it just washes off, because it is just far too shiny. But you can see there, by blending those oils in dry, you get that sort of shiny metal effect from underneath, which I think is really effective. Talking of metal areas underneath, just very light chipping here, just with a pencil, just a tiny bit on the wing root, the handholds where the pilot mechanic would get in, a little bit on the nose cowling, a little bit on the radio hatch in the back, and that's it really. I didn't want to do too much. Like I say, it's a late war 109, so maybe not too much of a lifespan. This is the exhaust, actually quite subtle compared to some of the photographs of these late war 109s. The synthetic fuel really did chuck out the soot, and yeah, it's very thin paint, just going in there, and you can just see the sort of pattern there, which I copied from photographs. Right, dangly bits now. This is the canopy. It's been unmasked, and very small gluing points actually for the head armour. Again, the undercarriage is not that positive. These are the Barracuda cast or Barracuda Studios aileron mass balances. So the hole is drilled a lot bigger, and you just cut down the plug to size and stick it in, and these are going to be a lot more robust than using the kit ones, which are effectively just a butt joint. And the last thing is the spinning room prop. So again, it was sprayed freehand and then going in with oils just to weather it up. A little bit of light tone there just to fade the RLM 70 black green. A very dark tone along the kind of line down the middle, and that's wet blended in. Got to be subtle against the white. That took a bit of blending actually. That tone was far too harsh, so I ended up blending most of that away in the end. White can be very tricky. There's the dry brush for the final blendage. And then some paint chipping. So this is a makeup sponge, which you get really fine chips with this, and I wanted it to be quite supple. And then on the black green, tiny little dabs. And that was it. That was the final bit really. Just had to just glue the final things on. And there is the finished aeroplane. So I really hope you enjoyed that. It's nice to get another Eduard 109 under my belt. I wanted to do this late war one for quite a while, and I'm very pleased with the result. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this whole series, and I'll just leave you with a few pictures and a little bit of music, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, bye bye.